Hello everyone, welcome to the phase A of the self-knowledge course. Today we are going to see topic number 9, and in this one we are going to be talking about the infradimensions or inferior dimensions. This is a very important topic, and well, remember that in the conference in which we saw topics 5 and 6 of this course, we talk about the different dimensions of nature and where they are found within us, since by law of correspondence, as without, so within, since each one of us is like a miniature cosmos, and hence the importance of knowing ourselves, since if we want to be able to know and to dominate the inner worlds of the planet, the solar system, of the galaxy, of the universe, we must first get to know and govern our own inner world. And if we want to know the gods that move and that also regulate this universe, we must first know and develop our own divinity. So today's topic is very important, since it will allow us to understand that just as it happens outside of us on planet Earth, it happens in our inner world. That just as in the bowels of the planet, under the epidermis of the Earth, there are infradimensions, so it happens inside us. We had already explained that dimensions are levels of consciousness. Therefore, the higher dimensions are just levels of consciousness higher than this third dimension in which we find ourselves. And among these superior dimensions, the ones or the highest, which are the 6th and the 7th, are what is known as the heavens, which in us are at the level of the pituitary gland and the pineal gland. And when we talk about infradimensions, we are talking, or inferior dimensions, we are talking about levels of consciousness lower than this third dimension in which we find ourselves. And those are the 2nd and the 1st dimensions, and they are also known as hell. So you can deduct from this that heaven and hell are levels of consciousness. And the higher our level of consciousness, we will be able to inhabit those superior dimensions where superior beings, enlightened masters, beings of light, gods, angels, etc. lives. And the lower our level of consciousness, we will live, a hell. But it is important to understand that although our physical body right now is in this third dimension, our egoic psyche, all our psychological defects, live in these inferior dimensions inside us and are what keep us tied to the low levels of consciousness that we handle, and who have been when we find ourselves with, or that we have exhausted our 108 opportunities as humans, are these same psychological defects that are going to condemn us to go through the involution process in those infradimensions that are found but externally under the surface of the Earth. And that is why this topic is so important, because in this one we are going to learn to identify and work on our internal infradimensions, and we are going to understand that wisdom comes out of evil, that light comes out of darkness, since both wisdom and light are trapped within each one of our psychological defects. So if we want to awaken our consciousness to free our wisdom and to free our inner light, we must learn to go down to these infradimensions. And it is actually in our lower abdomen where the 7 gates that lead to the internal infradimensions or the atomic hells are found. Here you can see like a representation of where it is found in us, like these 7 gates. And all the psychological defects that are part of our visible moon live there inside of ourselves, in our infradimensions. Because there is something that is important for us to understand, and that is that all human beings have 2 moons, since the solar part is our being. So our sun, our sun is like the union of the different parts of our being, which is our spirit, while our ego is the lunar part in us. So when we are talking about our ego, we are going to be talking about the moon in us. So these moons that we all have are the visible moon and the hidden moon. And the visible moon is related to our visible defects and to our own infradimensions, the ones that lives inside us. While our invisible moon is related to the causal selves that are like the seats of our ego, the 7 heads of legion, and it's related to the infradimensions of the planet Earth. So the first work that we must do is the cleaning of our visible moon, of our own infradimensions, since 97% of our sexual creative energy is trapped in the various psychological elements that we have. So we have, as I was saying, learn to go down to our infradimensions, and we do this through the practice of the psychological deck. And we go there, let's say, to rescue this energy to be able to make our different creations. That is the creation of our internal bodies. But there is something that is important, I think very important for us to understand. And that is that everything in this world is dual. It's good and evil, black and white. And so, inside us, we have bad defects or bad ways of being, and we have very good ways of being. But we must understand that neither good nor evil is consciousness. Only when we manage to extract the wisdom of that duality, work on our good and on our bad defects, can we reach that final comprehension that is light. Actually, believing ourselves good or trying to be good will not make us any conscious. Only when we become aware of our own darkness and we manage to draw the light from it, we will truly, truly become conscious. A famous psychoanalyst used to say, no one one doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So until we decide to do the conscious work on ourselves, we will not reach our own enlightenment. So when a being decides to end all the psychological defects voluntarily, he must first start a psychological work in daily life, working internally on all the psychological aggregates that emerge from his inner world at all times. And these psychological selves or eyes work by taking possession of the centers of the human machine, as we were talking in lecture number 4, and they are also taking possession of our sexual apparatus and of our sexual glands, so they come to feed on our energy to get stronger and to submit us more and more. And in this way, that person will be doing this work of eliminating all the psychological defects and rescuing all that consciousness and that is trapped there, and all the wisdom that is trapped there in a voluntary way. But if we don't decide to do this psychological work voluntarily in any of our 108 existences as humans, then we will have to go through the process of involution that we talked in the last lecture of the phase A, and going through the infradimensions of the planet Earth, where these psychological defects will be involuntarily and painfully disintegrated, while we go through the animal, the vegetable, and the mineral involutionary kingdoms. And they're losing the soul created in that cycle, and with it, losing all the wisdom of that turn on the wheel. So for that reason, the importance of understanding that we need to start a work on our infradimensions, of cleaning our own infradimensions. So what we must be clear about is that just as the infradimensions of the planet Earth are subdivided into those 9 circles that a master known as Dante Alighieri showed in a book known as the Divine Comedy. And for this reason, these 9 circles are known as the 9 Dante circles. Just like that, in our own internal infradimensions, we find the same 9 circles or 9 spheres that are the sphere of the Moon, the sphere of Mercury, the sphere of Venus, of Sun, of Mars, of Jupiter, of Saturn, of Uranus, and of Neptune. And in each of one of these spheres inhabit certain types of psychological defects that are grouped, let's say, by law of affinity, and they all live within ourselves. So it is important that we understand what exists within us and that we work on each of these psychological defects to purify ourselves internally, to free and awaken our consciousness, and therefore have the ability to raise our levels of consciousness. So in today's conference, what we are going to do is that we are going to see each one of these infradimensions. We are going to see the defects related to these infradimensions. We are also going to see to which of our internal centers they are like related, and we are going to be recognizing that yes, we inside us have all these psychological defects, and I hope that you get to understand the need to start a psychological work against these defects. Well, then let's start talking about each one of the spheres of our infradimensions. The first sphere that we find there is the sphere of the Moon. And this sphere is related to the defect of laziness and to those who have not been baptized. And it's related to, the moon, as I was saying, the visible moon, and it's related to the sexual center. And this is showing us, actually, that the first work that we must do is against our own laziness. That is the first work. Since it doesn't allow us, to start working on ourselves, to start practicing the psychological death, and to start practicing the super sex and the sacrifice for humanity. And we need to know that we must begin to create. This work of self-knowledge is actually about creating ourselves spiritually, but laziness prevents any creation, since it always leads us to do nothing, to waste our energy in, idle things, and spend our whole lives pursuing things that are not really going to lead us to awaken our consciousness. That is our laziness. And we can find this defect within ourselves in its active or its passive form. And both seeks to prevent creation. And we must recognize that, because sometimes we have our laziness in its passive pole, let's say, and we believe that we don't have laziness. But we are going to see that laziness in its active pole, it is leading us to be all the time carried away by leisure, just like wasting our time, spending our free time, I don't know, in social networks or games or watching series or movies or, I don't know, sleeping, whatever. And laziness in its passive pole is always leading us to have, yes, a lot of diligence, but for everything except for things of our consciousness, except for the things that are going to lead us to awaken our consciousness. Those things are going to seem to us like bored, like, oh my God, no. So it leads us to have very bad will for everything that has to do with psychological death, with even asking for death for our defects, to self-observe ourselves, to study our psychological defects, to meditate, to share the knowledge, but above all, to have very, very bad will to stop wasting our available sexual energy and start making internal creation. It is said that in this first cycle, or circle, sorry, are those who have not been baptized. You can find that, for example, in the Divine Comedy. But baptism is not about taking a child and putting water in, I don't know, his or her head. Actually, that is like the external representation of what is real baptism. Actually, baptism internally is about raising our waters towards our head, which is the symbolism of working on the sexual transmutation, which is the spiritual birth. A person who is baptized internally, really baptism, is someone who eliminates the fornicator self, which is the defect, who leads us to search to spill our sexual energy for pleasure, and is a person who achieves chastity and managed to raise his own spermatic waters vertebra by vertebra through his spine to the head. And that is actually the deep meaning of the baptism. And those who work on their laziness and manage to baptize internally by starting raising their own waters to their head through the sexual transmutation are actually liberated from the first infradimension, which is also known as the limbo. And this first infradimension is like related to the non-creation. And that is the reason why it is said that a child that has not been baptized will go to limbo. Actually, it is talking, it is a symbolism about what happens inside us. When we don't manage to get baptized, we are going to limbo. And this infradimension is actually fought, let's say, by doing. If we feel lazy, you can only combat laziness by doing. If you are lazy in your bed and you know that you must get up, to do a practice, and you stay there and you ask for death for laziness, but you just curled up in the sheets, you are feeding laziness. You are never going to get rid of it. And to fight against laziness, you need to ask for death and start doing. You must fight against that bad will. And you must start looking at all the details of laziness and fight laziness in order to start to create. And well, let's see the second sphere, which is the sphere of Mercury. This one is related to our seminal waters and our instinctive center. In this circle are found all our fornicating defects, those who don't value at all our waters, our sexual creative energy. And we spend our time expelling these waters through ejaculation and orgasm. Humanity doesn't value sexual energy, and we should reflect on this matter and understand why the seminal liquid is so available, to realize that it is this liquid that will allow us to make all those internal creations that we want to make, and that is precisely because of the value and the power that our sexual creative energy has, that in this society in which we live, there is so much promotion in so many different ways and methods to make us want to spill our sexual energy all the time. You see that moral values and principles have already been like so relaxed in such a way that in schools they are teaching children to masturbate, initiating them from an early age in that vice of spilling their sexual energy from the body. You see the pornography, you see how it is the music, the dances. Actually, the sacredness of sexuality has been lost because now what we practice is just like more like an animal sexual practice. And the dark entities, they do know the value of the sexual energy. They don't save their sexual energy at all because they are not willing to deny themselves their pleasures. But as they do know the value of the sexual energy, what they do is that they are constantly looking for people who are like saving their energy or that have a little of energy to make them lose that energy. For example, they attack them through the fourth dimension, making them have the sleep paralysis, or they attack them through their dreams, and they appear as very, I don't know, sensual women or men, and they are willing to have a sexual intercourse with the person, and they make the person to have a wet dream or a nocturnal emission. So that way they feed on that available sexual energy. So you see the importance of the sexual energy, and we must know that actually all our psychological defects, all the black lodge inside us, actually feed on fornication. Every time we spill our energy, we are feeding our psychological defects with this creative energy, and we are actually creating every time more defects. And if we want to detach ourselves from the second infradimension, we need to work on eliminating all our fornicating defects, all the desires, all the emotions, all the thoughts in the acts that we do that take us to spill our sexual energy, and that way we will be achieving chastity. And for this, we must understand first the value of the energy, the power that it has, and what it represents. And we need to start being radical with these defects in order to always be successful in our practices of suprasex. To never, in that sexual intercourse with our partner, to never reach orgasm and ejaculation, but every time to channel this energy through the spine to our brain. And we should start like a study of all these defects that every time are taking us to spill our sexual energy, and we need to be eliminating them with the psychological death. And we actually need to work in all those instincts of fornication that we carry from the animal kingdom, all those sensations that don't allow us to have control in our sexual organ, and we need to eliminate all these sensations with psychological death. Even the sensation of the orgasm and ejaculation that is there recorded in our instinctive center, we must eliminate that with the psychological death. And we must also analyze all the damages that have been generated in us because of the fornication, such as premature ejaculation, impotence, hypersensibility, homosexuality, the burning of neurons. You can see that this takes away our strength even to face life, because we are taking all the time our fire which is our energy, out from our body. So we must eliminate all the psychological details that lead us to fornication, and we must start having control of our desires and dominate our thoughts. So we achieve chastity, and this way we are going to detach ourselves from this infradimension. Well, let's now see the third infradimension, which is the sphere of Venus. And this one is related to all our pleasures and desires, and it is related to our emotional center. Here we find all our pleasures: eating, drinking, smoking, dancing, getting high, partying, working to have a lot of money, if that gives us a lot of pleasure, criticizing, falling in love, all that we call pleasure, but that always ends in suffering. We always end up at the other pole. We always end up by suffering. But there is something interesting, and it is that suffering is also a pleasure for us. You see that you find pleasure in crying, in complaining, to be listened, pleasure on telling your problems and the things that have happened to you, so that others know that you have done very badly and that you have had a very difficult time. And you see that if we are sad, we put sad songs to be sadder and continue enjoying our pain. And when sad, we actually don't really want that people encourage us. Rather, we want them to let us suffer and drink, and in short, we have actually made of pain a pleasure. And the problem with all these pleasures and sufferings is that they make us lose enormous amounts of energy. All those defects of partying, laughing, having vices, disappointment, depression, self-pity fit here. And they drain us an exaggerated amount of energy from our emotional center every time that we feed any of these pleasures or sufferings. And to work against this infradimension, we need to learn to rule our desires. In this circle, we find desire, who works as a psychological trainer. It's like our inner Lucifer, tempting us and testing us. And if we manage to overcome it, we become masters of fire and light. But if we don't overcome it, what we do is that we become its slaves, and we can never stop being what we are. We don't have never the courage to deny ourselves to our vices and to our depression or to our, resentments, etc. In all day, we have thousands of desires. We have the desire to fight, the desire to criticize, to smoke a cigarette, to drink a beer, to watch pornography, to masturbate, to lie, to cry. And when a desire is failed in the emotional center, it's like a fire. You feel like that fire, which is that desire. And we must understand that desire is actually the source of all strength. With a desire, we have two options: to refuse that desire or to surrender to it. For example, smoking. If I feel the desire to smoke, but I refuse that desire, and I start eliminating with the psychological defect that desire and what is making me feel, I will become owner of the force that the defect has trapped, because I'm going to rescue that force, that fire that the defect have trapped, and I'm going to make myself free, and that defect will no longer enslave me. And the same with any one of our vices, of our desires. But if we surrender, if we don't refuse the desire, what we do is that we become more and more slave to the defect, and it will become every time more difficult for me to refuse it. I will become dependent to that vice or that desire. And I mean, the same with everything that gives us pleasure. Every time that we give free rein to these things, we become dependent on them. And they enslave us because all our fire, all our inner spirit is actually trapped in them. And desire is like, let's say, like the bait that defects give us, promising to give us a pleasure that only results in a momentary pleasure that ends up turning into pain when we don't have that anymore, or when we, I don't know, cannot get that when we want to, or when we want to refuse that because we get to understand the damage that thing is doing to us, and then you feel the pain that is behind the pleasure. And we always fall for the same bait because we don't realize that happiness is not either on these two poles. It's not in pleasure, but it's not on suffering. Happiness is actually in the center, in that conscious force that we recover by denying ourselves to both, to the pleasure and to the pain. Actually, Buddha used to say that happiness is found in the absence of desire. And we as humanity, we are so confused thinking that we will find happiness by satisfying our desires. But desire is actually like a bottomless pit. It never gets full. And that is why we die without ever really finding true satisfaction or happiness. And if we want to detach ourselves from this third infradimension, we must learn to deny each of our desires to recover the fire or the energy to make our creations, and to recover the spirit and the strength to do our inner work. And well, that fire, that spirit will allow us to meditate, will allow us to achieve astral projection, to teach others, to practice supersex, and to get to see progress in this work. And well, that is the third circle, which is the sphere of Venus. Let's now see the sphere of Sun, which is the fourth one. And this one is related to our imbalance. It is also related to our intellectual center. And this imbalance is generated in us by our wasteful selves and our miser selves, or hoarding. And both of them leads us to misery, yes. And as our imbalance always ends up turning us internally into beggars, even externally sometimes. And our wasteful defects always want to throw away all wealth, the exterior wealth and the interior wealth. Our wealth is our money, our time, and our energy. So we must observe all the times that we spill our money, our time, but also our energy. And we must understand the need to eliminate these defects that keep us in that unbalance and that lead us to material and to a spiritual misery. And we also must observe the other pole, the hoarder defects, or the misers that wants to like monopolize everything for ourselves and not use it or share it. That doesn't let us like to seek to wisely invest our material wealth, as he only like monopolizes until a thief arrives and leaves us in misery, turning us into beggars. Can this be an external defect? An external thief that comes and take our money away, or an internal thief that actually come and make us spend that money, that time, or that energy. And you can see that it's the same in the exterior as in the interior, because exactly the same happens with our spiritual wealth, that is our energy. We know that our sexual energy, for example, is our most valuable wealth. And if we are celibate and we don't invest this energy wisely, sublimating as a single or practicing supersex with our partner, a fifth defect come and steal our energy, causing us to have a wet dream or a nocturnal emission. And the defects of our fourth infradimension, they always manage to keep us in material and spiritual misery. And if we want to detach ourselves from this infradimension, we must study all the psychological defects that keep us in that imbalance in money, time, and energy. The spendthrift defect that, I don't know, receive the payment and spend all the money, I don't know, in any kind of unnecessary things, for example. And we need to be clear that our purpose is to achieve self-realization. And for that reason, we need to try to make a balance and start using our energy and our time also in a wisely way to become owners of the wealth that is truly important, that is the inner wealth. Since to whoever that is working with the divine law in favor, who is seeking to ascend to higher levels of consciousness and is doing justice within by practicing the psychological death, everything else is given in addition. And why am I saying that? Because most of the time we expend our time, a lot of our time, and a lot of our energy, for example, in a work that takes us, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and we don't have time to make our inner work. And we must understand that if we actually start doing this work of self-knowledge, our inner being, who is the most interesting in that we do this work, is going to help us. So we don't have to work too much. So we can find a half-time work that gives us enough to live comfortable and to have more time to do this work. Because time is a valuable resource that we have, but most of the time we sell it for money. And we need to start reflecting on this. Well, let's now see the fifth infradimension, which is the sphere of Mars. This one is related to our motor center at this height. And you see that Mars is related with the force. And in this case, as we are talking about the infradimension, we are talking about a misuse of force. Anger, which is the defect that have it based in this infradimension, manifests itself in words, deeds, and omissions. When we insult someone, when we yell, when we are rude to someone, when we hit someone, when we assault, and also when we ignore someone or stop helping others because of resentment, for example. And we need to know that we actually have a lot of strength, but very poorly focused, since most of our strength is conditioned by anger. You can see that when you are possessed by your anger, you can actually hit someone and make someone, I don't know, real damage, because that defect actually have trapped and conditioned our force. So we must rescue the force that is actually there by eliminating these defects in us, because here in this work is where we are going to recover our real fire. So we must take the force we must take the force out of anger. And for this, we must study all the details of anger that are manifested in our daily lives. And in order not to feed these defects, we must learn to change the way we react. We see that anger reacts very quickly. Someone offends us or blame us or when we feel fear and we react mechanically with anger. And also when we feel frustrated or we feel guilty or doubtful, we immediately react like with anger. So we must start applying the self-observation to get to see the things like that trigger our anger, and to work it with the psychological depth, asking for depth for that desire to react and to the inner cause that is triggering my anger. And we will see that if we manage not to react, the mind will try to convince us, like telling us, you can let it humiliate you. You cannot let him pass over you, or you cannot let that child disobey you. And if we manage to also kill these defects in our mind, to ask our Divine Mother to eliminate them, and we don't react, we manage to control ourselves, we are going to regain strength, we are going to be rescuing the force, but also we are going to be like rescuing that wonderful virtue of the sweetness, of the gentleness. And we need to know that even though an angry person believes himself to be, strong, is actually someone really weak. He doesn't have any strength, or because he doesn't have any capacity for self-control. An angry person is actually everyone's puppet, because if someone wants to see that person bad or bad-tempered, they already know what has to tell them to watch them explode. And when angry, we don't have self-control. There are those situations that trigger our anger, and there we fall fighting, screaming, attacking, and after all the disaster, even crying or lamenting. A person without anger can actually handle in a conscious way any situation. So we must also observe our impatience, because it is one of the aspects that must lead us to anger. Impatience builds up and eventually explodes. And by detaching ourselves from this infradimension, we will regain strength and self-control, and we will develop our willpower. And well, let's now see the sixth sphere, which is the sphere of Jupiter. This one is related to our superior emotional center, to this center. And Jupiter is, that the largest planet in the solar system. And Jupiter actually represents love and giving without expecting anything in return. And respect to the infradimension, which is the opposite, it is related to the tyranny. So, in this circle, we are going to find all our tyrannical selves. And tyranny gives but expects something in return, and never respects the free will of others. And tyrants often mistake their tyranny for love. That is something very interesting to study. They all have something in common, and I'm not talking about people. Maybe you can relate to someone, but I'm actually talking about ourselves, about our tyrant selves, our tyrant ways of being. And they all have something in common. They believe that they have the truth. And so they believe that what they do is for the good of another. That they are imposing their will, they are imposing their truth in others, even to the detriment of the free will of the other person, because we love them. And for example, when we are, tyrants with our partner, that we don't want to let our partner to act or to think as they think they should do, or to, dress as they want to do, because, we are just taking care of them, or looking, before him, and no. Or when we are tyrants with our children, making them, I don't know, eat what they don't want to eat, or don't like to eat, what they really hate, or making them study what we think they should study, not what they want, or making them, when they grow up, to marry who we think is better, and so on. Those are our tyrant selves. And we are actually, if we get to observe ourselves, we are tyrants with everyone. We want people to think how we think and to like what we like. And actually, we are tyrants when we don't want to allow others to act with free will. And when we want people to do what we want them to do. We, in this infradimension, find all kinds of dictators. The tyrant is actually ignorant, since a person who truly has wisdom and love respects the free will. And we must know that humility is the basis of wisdom. And we need to learn to give what we have, the wisdom that we have, but without forcing or without manipulating others, but respecting their free will. And if we want to detach ourselves from this infradimension, we must study and eliminate all our tyrant selves, to observe, to question ourselves. When am I tyrant? And if we do so, in return, we will receive wisdom, and we will get to know the real love, which is the ability to give without expecting anything in return. And well, let's see the next infradimension, which is the 7th one. This is the sphere of Saturn. This one is related to our superior intellectual center, here in the pineal gland. It is in charge of the management of nature, and here we find all our crimes against Holy Spirit, against nature, and the violence against art. And the violence against nature, we find there the defects in us who likes using violence, for example, against animals or plants or the environment. We must see how we are polluting the planet, the waters. We can see the deforestation. There you can find all those defects. The violence against the Holy Spirit are all the sexual aberrations. In the second infradimension, we saw, the instinctive fornication. And here in this infradimension, as here we find our intellect, we will find like the lasciviousness. Because in this infradimension, we are going to study all our infrasexual selves that deform, that's so sacred, that is a sexual act, that pervert the creative function of the sexual energy. When we use sexuality, not just as in the second infradimension, that we use the sexuality as an instinctive fornication impulse, but here we use sexuality but to have fun, to degenerate, and to create more and more defects. Here we find masturbation, pornography, homosexuality, prostitution, oral sex, anal sex, sex with animals, pedophilia, necrophilia, etc. But here you are also going to find the violence against art. And we saw in the first topic that the art to which we refer is to the art of the supersexuality. So that is the violence in sex, when we rape, when we force or manipulate the other person to do sexual practice. Also, we find the self-obligation, when feeling sick or not feeling like practicing sex, we force ourselves to practice sex, maybe to, I don't know, to make feel the other person happy or whatever. And when we practice sex several times a day, and also when we practice sex during pregnancy or during menstruation, all those psychological defects must be studied and eliminated within us, because they are what takes like the sacredness out of the sexuality. Also here we find the violence against oneself. Here we find, for example, the defects that likes to make surgeries to change parts of your body because of fun or to look, I don't know, gorgeous, or the defects that wants to change sex or to change, I don't know, or to make castrations. Also, the violence against oneself, you find the abortions, the contraceptives, and our suicidal defects. And the last thing that you're going to find in this infradimension are the violence against God. And you know, like the pride against God or our inner being, by consciously doing the things that we already know that we shouldn't do, and we do them against the will of our inner being. And we must work on ourselves, all those defects of violence, if we want to detach ourselves of this circle. And we need to work diligently all those defects in order to achieve the true practices of supersense. And well, let's see the 8th sphere, which is the sphere of Uranus. Uranus is related to the Holy Spirit, is related to our sexual creative energy, is related to our Divine Mother, because Uranus is like the word itself, is the truth. And in the opposite side, in this infradimension, we are going to find all our defects related to lie. Our forgers, our fraudulent defects. For society, actually lying doesn't seem so serious. But actually for divine law, lying is one of the most serious crimes because it goes directly against the truth that is God. The liar, you see, that acts consciously of what he's doing. It is not an instinctive fault. It is something intellectual because we first plan it, and because when we are telling a lie, we actually know that we are telling a lie. So we are acting in awakened. We are acting for bad will. And in this infradimension, we will find all our liars, as I was saying, forgers. Also to all those who falsify religions, the forgers of money, the impersonators, the incestuous, the sowers of discord, the black magicians that invite people to fornicate, those to make promises and fail to keep their promises, also the false, the hypocrites, etc. All those who want the truth. And to combat this infradimension, we must learn to live in pursuit of the truth. Because each lie generates a lot of ties and a lot of chains, because you know that a lie requires many others to support the first one. And when we tell a lie without realizing it, we find ourselves involved in a web of lies that we cannot get out of, and we in that way come to harm others and even to harm ourselves. So we must look at all the consequences of lies, look at how it hurts others and ourselves, and how it takes us away from our inner Father, who is the truth. And well, the last infradimension is the sphere of Neptune. And now, by talking about this, we are in our sexual apparatus. That is the point to which one this infradimension is related to. And here we find all the treasured selves of our psychology. Here we are going to find each one of our desires, justifications, and ill wills, because that is the steps to get to treason. And we are going to find here all those bad wills that prefer to always do the will of the ego than the will of the consciousness. And here, this treason is the most terrible defect of us. Yeah, it has maintained us through so many existences without doing the work on ourselves, because every time that we receive this knowledge in all our different existences, and we like get excited, I don't know, when we decide, yeah, in this existence I'm going to self-realize. Yes, I'm gonna do it. But something happened, whatever, and we like feel the desire of stop doing this work, and we'll have a very good justification, always a very good justification, and we act out of ill will, and we end up all the time treasoning our inner being and not taking this work to a success. So it is actually betrayal or treason what finally condemns us to evolution. Since all the time, with all our acts, all our words, and all our omissions, we have been betraying that pact that we made when we left the absolute sun, and that we make every time we come into existence to do the work of the Father. And we always end up like silencing our consciousness that is constantly seeking to wake us up, to remind us, to warn us, and we always end up doing the will of our defects. And we are very used to betray. We are very used to breach what we agree with our verb. We promise that on that date we are going to pay that money that we owe, or that we are going to return, I don't know, that book, or that we are going to I don't know, deliver such a work, or we promise that we are going to love someone for life, and we are constantly breaching our covenants. And what we do, we justify ourselves, and we don't give it more importance. Yeah, when we are the ones who betray, because when are the other people who betray us, then we are going, yeah, that is so bad. So to stop being traitors and detach ourselves from this infradimension, we must begin to study all our treacherous selves that manifest in us throughout the day by the desire, the mind, or the justification, and the ill will, and discover them and eliminate them. And well, that way we are going to detach ourselves from this last infradimension. And actually, this procedure of working on our ego, on eliminating our ego, is what is known as self-knowledge. To go down to these infradimensions at every moment by practicing the psychological death, the psychological observation, the psychological death, and by practicing the retrospection and the reflective meditation to dig up into our defects, to study them, to know why we act as we act, why we think as we think, why we feel as we feel, and eliminate each of these defects with the help of the force of love, which is our Divine Mother, to get to rescue all our consciousness and rescue all that energy that will allow us to create ourselves internally, and to awaken all of our consciousness and be able to unite ourselves with our inner being, which is to achieve the self-realization. And well, from these infradimensions is from where will come the light that illuminates our inner darkness, and that is also known as the wisdom of evil. And from this will come the love that is trapped in all those defects. So, well, this has been today's lecture. I hope that you managed to understand this topic and its importance. And if you have any question, you can contact me here in the page through the messenger, and I will gladly help you to resolve any concern, any doubt that you have. And I want to invite you to next lecture that we are going to see on Friday at the same time. And in that topic, the topic number 10, we are going to be talking about the 7 bodies. We are going to be talking about their characteristics, well, everything related to our 7 bodies, and we are going to be talking about how to create those 7 bodies. So we are going to be explaining in detail the practice of the sexual transmutation. So don't miss that lecture. And well, thank you very much. And I want to say hi to Mariela, yeah, who is here. Hi, Mariela. Thank you very much for coming. And well, see you in the next lecture. Ciao, ciao.